Emma Collins had learned to love quiet mornings, even when they felt heavy. That Saturday in early spring, rain slid down her kitchen window in thin silver lines, and the sky over her small Oregon town looked pale and tired. She stood barefoot on the cool wooden floor, wrapping both hands around a fresh cup of coffee as if it could warm more than her fingers. The house was neat, calm, almost too calm. 2 years had passed since her divorce, yet silence still echoed in strange ways. She had grown used to doing everything alone, choosing her own paint colors, cooking simple meals, falling asleep with a book instead of a conversation. It was peaceful, but it was also lonely. She told herself she preferred it that way. No sudden arguments, no disappointment, no broken promises, just quiet. She had plans to spend the day catching up on work from the bookstore, where she handled marketing, maybe reorganize a shelf, maybe call her sister in Seattle. Nothing special, nothing risky. Then came the knock. It was steady but unsure, like someone debating whether to change their mind. Emma froze. She rarely had visitors. For a second, she considered pretending she wasn't home. But the knock came again, softer this time. She set her mug down, smoothed her sweater, and walked to the door with careful steps. When she opened it, she found Daniel Harper standing on her porch, rain droplets clinging to his dark jacket. He looked slightly embarrassed, running a hand through his damp hair. Daniel had moved in 3 months ago, into the blue house next door that had been empty for almost a year. He kept to himself. He waved politely. He shoveled his walkway early in the mornings. Once, he had helped her gather groceries when a paper bag split open in her driveway. She remembered noticing his calm voice and the way he didn't ask unnecessary questions. Now he stood there holding a small paper bag and offering a hesitant smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said. "My coffee maker gave up on me this morning. I was wondering if I could borrow a cup. I'll replace it, I promise." It was such a simple request that Emma almost laughed. Of all the dramatic things she feared might knock on her door, it was just a neighbor asking for coffee. "You're not bothering me," she replied, stepping aside. "Come in." The words left her mouth before she could overthink them. Daniel paused for a brief second, as if making sure she meant it, then walked inside. He wiped his shoes carefully on the mat and looked around with quiet respect. The scent of rain followed him in, mixing with the rich smell of fresh coffee. Emma poured him a cup, without asking how he liked it. "Black is fine," he said quickly, as if reading her mind. They sat at the small wooden kitchen table across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. It felt strange having someone there, sharing her quiet space. Daniel broke the silence first. He thanked her again and joked that technology was unreliable when you needed it most. She smiled, surprised by how easy it felt. His voice was steady, warm, without pressure. They began with safe topics: how he was adjusting to the town, how unpredictable the Oregon weather could be, how the local cafe closed too early for anyone who worked late. He told her he worked remotely for a tech company in Seattle, which explained the odd hours she sometimes noticed his porch light glowing. She told him about the bookstore, about planning community events and author signings. He seemed genuinely interested, asking questions without interrupting. Emma noticed how natural the conversation felt. There was no rush, no awkward silence stretching too long. The rain tapped against the roof as if keeping time. She realized she had not had a real conversation like this in months. Most of her talks were short, polite exchanges at work, or quick phone calls with family. This was different. It felt present. At one point, Daniel's eyes drifted to the corner of the kitchen counter, where a framed photograph rested face down. He didn't comment immediately, but she saw the flicker of understanding in his expression. "You don't have to explain anything," he said gently when he noticed her glance. His tone held no judgment, only respect. Something in her relaxed. "It's just part of the past," she replied simply, and for the first time saying it felt true. He nodded, as if he carried his own quiet history. The air between them shifted, not heavy, but honest. Two adults who had known disappointment, sitting across from each other with warm mugs in their hands. Emma found herself laughing at one of his stories about getting lost during his first week in town because his GPS signal failed. The sound surprised her. It filled the kitchen in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. Daniel smiled at that laugh, and she caught the way his eyes softened. Time moved quickly. The rain began to slow, the gray sky lightening just a little. Emma realized her coffee had gone cold. Daniel glanced at his watch and looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't mean to stay this long," he said. "Thank you for letting me crash your morning." She walked him to the door, unsure why a small sense of disappointment tugged at her chest. He stepped back onto the porch, the air now fresh and clean after the rain. For a brief second, they stood facing each other, neither quite ready to end the moment. "I owe you one," he said with a quiet smile. "You don't owe me anything," she replied, meaning more than just the coffee. He nodded once and headed toward his house next door. Emma closed the door slowly, resting her hand against it after it clicked shut. The kitchen felt quiet again, but not empty in the same way. Something had shifted, small but real. She hadn't expected anything when she opened the door. She certainly hadn't expected to feel lighter, as if a window inside her had cracked open. It was only coffee, only a neighbor, only a rainy morning. Yet as she picked up her mug and stared out at the clearing sky, Emma knew that something had quietly begun, and she had no idea where it might lead. After Daniel stepped inside with the rain still clinging to his jacket, the mood in Emma's kitchen changed in a quiet but powerful way. She handed him the warm mug, their fingers almost touching, and for a brief second, she felt a spark of awareness she hadn't felt in years. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table, steam rising between them, and the air felt warmer than before. Daniel took a careful sip and smiled. "This is better than anything my machine ever made," he said, and Emma laughed softly, surprised at how easily the sound escaped her. The conversation started simple and moved quickly, as if both of them had been waiting for someone safe to talk to. He spoke about moving from Chicago to Oregon for a fresh start, about working long hours on his laptop, about missing the noise of a busy city, but not the pressure that came with it. Emma listened closely, noticing the way his voice slowed when he spoke about change. She understood that tone. She told him about the bookstore, about helping local writers share their stories, about planning reading nights that only a handful of people attended but still mattered. He seemed truly interested, leaning forward slightly, asking what kind of books she loved most. "Stories where people find their way back to themselves," she answered without thinking, then felt her cheeks warm. Daniel didn't tease her. He nodded like he understood completely. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the window, but inside the kitchen, the mood felt steady and calm. Daniel's eyes wandered to the picture frame turned face down on the counter. He didn't ask directly, but Emma noticed his glance. Instead of changing the subject, she decided not to hide. "That was my wedding photo," she said simply. "It didn't end the way I thought it would." There was no anger in her voice, only truth. Daniel rested his hands around his mug and looked at her with quiet respect. "I was engaged once," he said after a moment. "We thought we wanted the same future. Turns out, we didn't." He said it without blame, without bitterness. Just facts. That honesty made Emma feel safe. They were two adults who had loved deeply and lost carefully. No drama, no harsh words, just lessons carried quietly. The conversation deepened without feeling heavy. They talked about fear, the kind that doesn't shout but lingers. Emma admitted she had grown comfortable being alone because it felt predictable. Daniel confessed he had focused on work, because it was easier than risking his heart again. Their words flowed faster now, not rushed, but open, as if a door had been unlocked. Emma noticed how his smile reached his eyes when she joked about her failed attempts at gardening. He laughed fully, not politely, and told her about accidentally killing a houseplant within a week of moving in. The tension that often filled her chest on quiet mornings was gone. In its place was warmth. She became aware of small details: the faint scent of his cologne mixed with rain, the steady way he held eye contact, the softness in his tone when he listened. It had been a long time since someone truly listened to her without trying to fix or judge. Daniel wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't speaking in big promises. He was simply present. Time moved quickly. The kitchen clock ticked past noon, unnoticed. Emma realized she hadn't checked her phone once. That alone felt rare. The rain began to slow, sunlight pushing gently through the gray sky. Daniel glanced toward the window and then back at her, almost surprised at how long he had stayed. "I didn't mean to take over your morning," he said, though his voice held a hint of reluctance. Emma shook her head. "I'm glad you did," she admitted, and the honesty of her words hung softly between them. There was a brief silence, not awkward but thoughtful. Something unspoken hovered there: curiosity, attraction, possibility. Neither named it, yet both felt it. Daniel stood slowly, placing the empty mug in the sink despite her protest. "Thank you," he said again, and this time the words carried more meaning. "Thank you for the coffee. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the trust." Emma walked him to the door, aware of her heartbeat in a way that felt new and old at the same time. When he opened the door, cool, fresh air slipped inside. He paused on the porch and turned back to her. For a second, it seemed like he might say something more, something bold, but instead, he gave her a warm, steady look. "Maybe next time the coffee maker breaks, I'll return the favor," he said lightly. Emma smiled. "Or maybe it doesn't have to break," she replied before she could stop herself. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment something shifted again, deeper this time. Hope. Not loud or overwhelming, just quiet and steady. Daniel nodded, understanding the meaning behind her words. Then he stepped off the porch and walked toward his house next door, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. Emma closed the door slowly and leaned against it, exhaling. The house felt different now, not smaller, not empty, just changed. She walked back into the kitchen and looked at the two mugs sitting side by side in the sink. It was such a simple image, yet it made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She realized she had laughed more in the past hour than she had in weeks. She had spoken openly without fear of being misunderstood. She had felt seen. That realization both thrilled and scared her. Starting over had once felt impossible. Now it felt possible, but fragile. She stood by the window and watched as Daniel reached his front door. He turned briefly, almost as if sensing her gaze, and gave a small wave. She waved back before stepping away from the glass, her heart racing in a way she hadn't planned for. It had only been coffee. Just a neighbor stopping by on a rainy morning. But as Emma picked up her now cold mug and took a thoughtful sip, she knew something had quietly begun to unfold, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. After that rainy morning, life did not return to normal, no matter how much Emma tried to act like it had. The change was subtle but constant, like a soft light left on in the next room. The following Monday, she left for work at the bookstore a few minutes earlier than usual, pretending it was to avoid traffic, though the town barely had any. As she locked her front door, Daniel stepped out of his house at the exact same time, laptop bag over his shoulder, surprise flashing across his face before turning into a smile. "Morning," he called, casual but warm. "Morning," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steady. They walked to their cars together, talking about the week ahead. He mentioned a big virtual meeting. She talked about planning a local author event. The conversation was simple, yet both of them stretched it longer than needed, neither rushing to get inside their cars. When they finally drove off in opposite directions, Emma felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. This was how things started, she reminded herself. Small steps, shared mornings, easy smiles. Over the next few days, their timing kept matching in ways that felt almost planned but never spoken about. She would step outside to water her small row of plants and find him checking his mail. He would be out for a short evening walk just as she decided she needed fresh air. They never forced conversation. It flowed naturally. He told her about a project deadline that kept him up late. She admitted she had stayed at the bookstore after closing just to avoid going home too early. "Do you ever get tired of the quiet?" he asked one evening as they stood near the sidewalk, the sky painted pink and gold. She thought about lying but didn't. "Sometimes it feels peaceful," she said. "Sometimes it feels loud." He understood exactly what she meant. The town began to notice their growing closeness. Mrs. Patterson from across the street smiled knowingly when she saw them talking. A co-worker at the bookstore teased Emma after spotting Daniel picking her up from work one afternoon when her car wouldn't start. Nothing serious had happened between them, yet the possibility hung clearly in the air. Emma felt it most at night. She would sit on her couch with a book open but unread, her mind replaying their conversations. She remembered the way he listened without interrupting, the way he looked at her as if what she said mattered. It scared her how quickly she had begun to care. She had promised herself after her divorce that she would not rush into anything again. She had rebuilt her life carefully, brick by brick. Letting someone in meant risking cracks in the walls she had worked so hard to build. Daniel struggled with his own doubts. Sitting on his porch one evening, he stared at his phone, debating whether to text her. He had learned the hard way that feelings could move faster than reality. His past engagement had ended not with anger, but with distance, two people slowly realizing they wanted different futures. He had sworn he would not ignore warning signs again. But with Emma, nothing felt forced or dramatic. It felt steady, real. One Thursday afternoon, Emma came home to find a small bag hanging from her doorknob. Inside was a fresh bag of premium coffee beans and a note in Daniel's neat handwriting. "For the best neighbor and even better coffee. D." She smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. The gesture was simple, yet thoughtful. She decided to return it with blueberry muffins, still warm from her oven. When she knocked on his door, her heart pounded harder than it should have. He opened it quickly, as if he had been hoping it was her. "I come bearing baked goods," she said, holding up the container. He laughed and stepped aside to let her in. This time it was his kitchen. Cleaner than she expected. Minimal, organized, almost careful. They stood close as she set the muffins down, aware of the smaller space. The air felt charged, not uncomfortable, just aware. "You didn't have to," he said softly. "I wanted to," she answered, meeting his eyes. That look lingered longer than before. Neither crossed any lines, yet the space between them felt thinner. Over the next week, the unspoken question grew stronger. "What are we doing?" They had not called it a date. They had not labeled anything. But their connection was no longer casual. Emma found herself choosing outfits more carefully in the mornings. Daniel caught himself checking if her porch light was on at night. Finally, on a Friday evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned cool, Daniel made a decision. He walked across the lawn to her house, his pulse steady but determined. When she opened the door, she looked surprised but pleased. "Hey," she said softly. He took a small breath. "There's live music at the cafe downtown tonight," he began. "I was thinking of going. I'd rather not go alone." He kept his tone light, giving her room to say no. Emma's heart raced. She knew this was more than music. It was a step forward, a shift from neighbors to something else. Fear rose quickly, whispering reminders of past pain, of trust broken slowly over time. She looked at Daniel and saw none of that in his eyes. She saw patience, hope. "It's just music," he added gently. No pressure. She studied his face, searching for signs of hurry or expectation. There were none, only sincerity. The safe choice would have been to decline, to protect her calm life. But safe had also been lonely. She didn't want lonely anymore. Okay, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. Relief flashed across his face, followed by a warm smile. I'll pick you up at 7? He asked. She nodded. As he walked back to his house, Emma closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. This was real now. Not just shared coffee or sidewalk talks. A date, even if they hadn't called it that. She walked to her bedroom and opened her closet, suddenly aware that this night mattered. Outside, the sky darkened slowly, and a new chapter waited just hours away. At exactly 7 o'clock, Daniel stood on Emma's porch holding a quiet kind of hope in his chest, and when she opened the door wearing a simple navy dress and a soft smile, he forgot every careful line he had planned to say. She looked natural, calm, beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with effort, and for a second they just looked at each other, both aware that this night mattered. Then he offered his arm in a gentle, almost old-fashioned way, and she laughed softly before locking the door behind her, the evening air cool and fresh after days of rain, as they walked side by side toward his car, their shoulders almost touching, the silence between them comfortable instead of tense. The cafe downtown glowed with warm yellow lights, music already floating onto the sidewalk, and inside the space felt alive but intimate. Small round tables filled with quiet conversations, a guitarist playing soft acoustic songs that wrapped around the room like a blanket, and Daniel chose a table near the corner where they could talk without raising their voices. At first they spoke about easy things, the singer's voice, the smell of fresh coffee, a funny sign near the counter. But soon the conversation moved deeper without force, as if both had decided silently that pretending no longer made sense. Emma admitted she had almost said no earlier because she was afraid of wanting something she might lose, and Daniel listened closely, his expression steady, before telling her he had almost not asked because he feared pushing her too soon, and that honesty created a quiet shift, something stronger than attraction, something built on respect. They ordered dessert. They didn't really need just to stay longer, sharing bites without thinking, their hands brushing once on the table and neither pulling away this time. And the contact was simple yet meaningful, not dramatic, not rushed, just two adults choosing closeness carefully. As the music slowed, Daniel asked her what she wanted her life to look like in 5 years, and the question surprised her because no one had asked her that in a long time. So she answered truthfully, saying she wanted peace but not loneliness, love but not control, partnership without losing herself, and he nodded slowly as if memorizing each word, then said he wanted the same, a steady kind of love built on friendship first. Hours passed quickly, the cafe lights dimming slightly as closing time approached, and when they finally stepped outside, the town was quiet, streetlights casting soft circles on the pavement, their steps slower now, as if neither wanted the night to end. He walked her to her porch again, the same place where everything had begun with a simple cup of coffee, and they stood facing each other under the porch light, the moment stretching gently, full of possibility. Emma felt the familiar flicker of fear, but it was smaller now, quieter than her hope. And Daniel seemed to sense her thoughts because he didn't rush forward, didn't try to claim more than the evening had offered. Instead, he reached for her hand and held it warmly, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles in a reassuring way. "I'm really glad my coffee maker broke," he said with a soft smile, and she laughed, the sound easy and real, replying, "Me too." And in that exchange was gratitude not just for the accident, but for the courage that followed. He leaned closer slightly, giving her the choice to step back if she needed, but she didn't. And when he kissed her, it was gentle and brief, a promise rather than a demand, a beginning instead of a conclusion. And when they pulled apart, there was no awkwardness, only a shared understanding that something steady had started. He told her he would call her tomorrow, not as a question but as a plan, and she liked that, clear, simple, honest. Then she watched him walk down the steps, turning once to wave before heading next door. and as she stepped inside, her house felt different again. Not smaller, but warmer, filled with quiet anticipation instead of echoing silence. She leaned against the closed door, touching her lips lightly with her fingers, smiling at the memory of the evening, realizing that nothing dramatic had happened, no grand speeches, no rushed decisions. Yet everything had changed because she had allowed herself to try. Later, as she stood by her bedroom window, she saw Daniel's porch light turn off and, instead of feeling alone, she felt connected, as if an invisible thread now stretched gently between their homes. She knew there would be challenges ahead, real conversations about the future, moments of doubt, but tonight proved they were both willing to step forward with care instead of fear. The story that began with rain and a borrowed cup of coffee had grown into something honest and promising, not perfect, but real. And as Emma turned off her own lights and slipped into bed, her last thought before sleep was simple and clear. Sometimes love does not arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it knocks softly on your door, asks for coffee, and waits patiently for you to say yes.